While I think the actions of, let's say, Augustus and the Lex Julia de Adulteris Coercendis, which was the first penalization of sexual immorality by the state as far as I know of, would not be workable in today's Me Too and woke world.
Yeah, so Black Pigeon Speaks was just speaking rather nostalgically about an ancient adultery law, which I guess the Me Too movement and woke culture irrationally oppose or something. The law he's referring to was rather extreme and allowed a husband to prosecute a wife that had cheated on him. And in the event that the husband refused to prosecute within 60 days, the law handily allowed a third party to prosecute in their place. So, what exactly were the penalties associated with this law? I'm glad you asked. A father could kill their daughter and their lover if they were caught in the act of sexual intercourse. Additionally, a husband wasn't strictly allowed to kill either their wife or their lover, but if he happened to kill one or the other, it allowed for the softening of legal penalties, which in turn helped encourage extreme domestic violence. And, quote, a man who had sexual relations with a prostitute, registered, or kept a concubine of low class, or had sexual relations with freed women or men or slaves, either his or someone else's, was not guilty of adultery, end quote. The good old days, when men could do pretty much whatever they pleased, but women were held to a different standard. One thing I find rather interesting about this video, as well as many other reactionary YouTuber videos, is that they never come right out and explain what they want done about the supposed civilization-ending things they're talking about in their videos. In this video, for example, Black Pigeon rails against the evil women who aren't making enough babies to keep Western civilization ticking along. But he doesn't really offer any solutions. I mean, I get it. The solutions would expose his hand, and people would actually see the sort of tyranny you'd need to adopt to create a Black Pigeon Speaks utopia, where women are kept uneducated, dependent on men, and unable to control their own reproductive rights. But, we'll get into all that right after the intro.
While women, since at least the 1960s or 70s, were promised fulfilling and rewarding careers as well as a full family life, what many have found after hitting the wall is a life filled with hen parties, smothered in cheap wine, and endless days spent searching for new cat toys, or the life spent as a leftover woman.
The first thing that strikes me is the imagery, how he uses it to bait his audience. Many of which likely despise women and their ability to make their own choices in life as much as he seems to. And you might be thinking that I'm going a little too far there. But listen to this clip taken from a video titled, Do Women Destroy Civilizations? And if you can tell me with a straight face that he isn't venomously opposed to women being able to choose their own sexual partners, I don't know what else to tell you.
By allowing women to fuck freely.
Yeah. He also acts as if every woman who enters middle age, without having several kids and a husband, are sitting around gritting their teeth in anger. But that's just not reality. Not only does he never seem to do the same when it comes to career-oriented men, but he also makes it seem as if women suddenly lose their sex appeal and ability to form a lasting relationship once they reach their 30s? It's hard to tell at what age he thinks there's nothing left but hen parties and cheap wine. But, he does seem to think there is some sort of expiration date, after which you become a, quote, leftover woman, shopping for cat toys, unable to find a partner, or some such nonsense. Which is kind of funny because he then follows that up by pointing out that some people are perfectly happy not being in a relationship.
But nevertheless, in Japan, there are many that have said that they have come to accept their life of solitude. And I personally know many women and a few men that have resigned themselves to a life spent alone and in celibacy for most of the time. But that doesn't mean that this is an optimal outcome for the individual or for society.
So I'm not sure why he thinks he's more capable of judging what's best for another individual, or a society for that matter. But he also says that he knows many women, and just a few men, who are fine with celibacy and living alone. But according to his own source, there were 13.43 million solo dwellers in Japan as of June 2016, and, quote, about 40% said they were devoting their time to hobbies. Inomoto said that results also showed that many people were satisfied with their solitude, citing freedom to manage time and money without restrictions, end quote. Now, that certainly doesn't sound like Japanese women are drowning their sorrows with cheap wine and cat toys. In fact, the article also says that, on the contrary, it seems to be men who struggle with being alone. Quote, Japanese men simply depend too much on their wives and children. Women are more capable of building personal connections and are thus more independent. End quote. So I guess there goes the whole leftover woman, cat toy, cheap booze thing.
Even Candace Bushnell, author of Sex and the City, who is said to have left a trailblazing legacy for women on television, now believes that the independent lifestyle of non-committal casual sex and of being perpetually single that she had championed may not be as rewarding after all, and now admits that she regrets not having kids. She's now 60, and after a divorce in 2012, she admitted that it made her realize how not starting a family made her feel truly alone.
It is true that Candace said that, but most people do things they regret when they're young, and that doesn't mean we should prevent them from making their own decisions. As this article title points out, acknowledging that there is a risk you will regret your life choices later does not condemn them. Sure, maybe Candace wishes she could have a do-over, but how many men also feel that way? How many career men wish they could get some of that time back so that they could build a strong relationship with a partner, or their kids, or both? And while people like Black Pigeon love to take one case that supports their point and imply that it applies to all women, he conveniently leaves out the many women who don't regret their decision to forego marriage or children or both, such as Lily Tomlin, Betty White, Oprah Winfrey, Jennifer Aniston, Cameron Diaz, and many, many more.
Since the introduction of the contraceptive pill, as well as abortion on demand, combined with the introduction of women into the workforce, that has over the decades necessitated the need for women to stay in education longer and longer, and this is during their peak fertility years, we have seen since the 1970s birth rates crashing across the developed world to a point where countries are no longer even capable of replacing themselves.
Again, I can't help but notice how he never lays out what he wants done about the dropping birth rate. Does he want abortion outlawed? Does he want women denied birth control? Does he want women to be deprived of the ability to get an education, at least during their, quote, peak fertility years? He doesn't come right out and say it, but the next part really drives home what he thinks the problem is. And if you think it's an issue, then you might want to prevent it somehow, right? Have a listen.
In the United States, barely half of adults are married, and for many that are, having children becomes a choice of affordability, of lifestyle preference, and a plethora of many other things. Education and wealth are also correlated with fertility, meaning the more educated and more income a woman has, the less children she's likely to produce. And sadly, the reverse is also true with all of the dysgenic consequences that we are seeing emerge in society today.
So, translation, keep women uneducated, dependent on men, and pregnant to save Western civilization. And what the hell is he talking about when he says dysgenic consequences? What is biologically defective or deficient? How does that word even make sense in that context? You can't just throw out a word like that and then follow it up with no explanation. It's like he just picked a big, scary sounding word and threw it in to make himself sound smart. It's so frustrating. The first part of that clip is sort of true. There are a plethora of reasons why a woman might decide to have fewer kids or no kids at all. This might include insufficient resources, climate change, or some other unpredictability about the environment, unaffordable childcare, career ambitions, limited access to health insurance, and or poverty, which wouldn't be that surprising in a country like America, with a disturbing amount of wealth inequality, a healthcare system that often leaves people bankrupt, and has left millions of Americans a paycheck or two away from disaster. If you want to increase the birth rate so badly, maybe start looking at providing the support structures for both men and women that Americans would need to raise children, which would in turn grow the available avenues and choices people have, instead of trying to limit women's choices in an attempt to force them into doing what you want.
As a civilization, you'd be pretty hard-pressed to dispute the fact that we've entered a sort of death spiral. We are a civilization that cannot even produce the next generation to replace ourselves and have thus outsourced having children to the millions and millions around the globe that clamor to get into our societies, and we do so hoping that they and their children will pay the taxes of tomorrow and fund our retirements and social welfare systems. While many say that this is a wonderful and enriching thing, and it may be, nobody knows the future, whatever comes of it, 100, 200, 300, 500 years down the road, Western civilization, unless there is a dramatic change of course, will end. Something new will of course take its place, but the question is, will it be a step forward for human progress or 2 steps backward? And maybe that's just the case for all civilizations. As Spengler notes, all civilizations go through a seasonal-like cycle, and we in the West are in the winter of our own. However, there have been civilizations that have been able to reignite themselves during prolonged periods of crises.
So a lot of fear-mongering going on there. Not sure where he gets the idea that Western civilization is in a death spiral or what he's basing it on other than birth rate. Well, the birth rate is shrinking in some countries. The global birth rate is still over the replacement rate of 2.1. Countries with low birth rates have been able to compensate with migration, and that will likely continue. As countries with high birth rates continue to develop, we may face a global issue, but that isn't necessarily negative. For example, fewer people would mean that humanity will have a smaller carbon footprint, and our environmental impact overall will become less detrimental to the rest of life on Earth. True, we may have to restructure how we do things socially and economically, but the entire world will be facing the same issues, and we're a resourceful species that's perfectly capable of beating such an obstacle. I think I spent enough time in this video. It was a hard watch, but if you'd like to support me on Patreon, I'd be eternally grateful. Donations help me upgrade equipment, buy avatars, and so on. I've also started posting Patreon-only D&D maps that patrons are free to download and use in their games. So if you're interested in that, you can have access to all past and present maps for as little as $1 a month. As always, thanks for watching, happy Halloween, cheers.
You take me home, invite me in. The lights go down and we begin.